Gloria and Devin, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, especially since this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I know that you've listed a long list of accomplishments, but certainly, I think we'll dive some more into that story later on. So today, we'll spend about 50 or so minutes to talk about how you can recognize some of the signs and symptoms of stress, and also what's causing some of those issues too. We'll also talk about some of the ways you can try to hack these, their symptoms away. So how to hack your mind, your body, your time, and your social life too. And also, if you ever need any more power-ups for your hacking, there's lots of resources out there, and I will just point you to some of the more promising ones too. I think that all of us have faced some sort, or know of somebody who's faced some sort of condition in the past, whether it's stress to anxiety to complete panic attacks and breakdowns too. And certainly I myself have had a share of them too. And also seeing folks who have been affected by these conditions. Seeing folks and seeing them recover and seeing them reach their goals has been such a joy to me, and being able to work with folks at other universities. This is Dr. Gibson on technology issues, on how we can use technology to boost access to mental health conditions, and now being able to teach other physicians and other healthcare providers too has been really important to me. But I gotta say, 20 years ago, you would not have found me being able to muster up the courage to speak in front of a crowd like this, or folks worldwide too. I remember the times when I was in Soda Hall at UC Berkeley, where I was studying computer science at the time. It was very, very stressful. It was a pressure cooker time. And so this is me with a bag of beans trying to nosh on and study, and all of the books that we've had to go through. This is just for one of 4 exams in medical school too. And even on vacation times, I'd be taking my books and trying to read through them. So it was this always-on culture, right, that was through school and now pervades work, that has really, really led to a lot of anxiety and stress that I've faced myself too. And a lot of it comes from this sort of inner critic voice, this feeling that I could never be good enough. There are all these negative thoughts that I've dealt with in the past. Things like telling myself, gosh, I wish I could get more done, or I feel tired all the time, I can't make a mistake, I'm not good enough. These are things that I've faced myself, and other people face too, and those voices can be internalized and lead to something called imposter syndrome, where you feel like you're a fake or you're an imposter. And I think that the turning point for me was seeing how much my colleagues were suffering too. I've learned just in the past few weeks that there's a physician who takes their own life a day on average. So this is being reported more and more through suicide. And so the culture of even medicine isn't set up to sort of acknowledge these mental health conditions and the fact that there's just an enormous amount of stress. We see this in executives too, and administrators too. There are warning signs such as depressed mood. There have been cases of executives. There's one in the Harvard Business Review. One executive would say, I wish I would have a heart attack so that I could have an excuse to go to the hospital and get away from work. And that wasn't quite a suicidal plan, but certainly along those lines, if you're coming up with a plan and thinking of executing on that plan, that's a warning sign. And then drugs and alcohol use to sort of mute those feelings can be a warning sign that more acute intervention is needed. So having that and seeing that in my colleagues, seeing life in my family, my nephews and nieces, seeing my relatives pass away, and then finally going through something big myself, where I myself am being considered and have found out that I'll be a live kidney donor later, potentially later this year. That's a huge something that made me realize, this is something that I would love to talk about and teach others about stress and anxiety, and making sure that we live the lives that we want too. So what is the turning point that you or your friends may be facing too? Online, people talk about things like kids being their turning point, having kids, or having a major health scare, or traveling nonstop to the point of exhaustion, working nonstop. Those are things that could be the turning point, but you don't have to wait for a turning point to happen, certainly. But this is a big deal, and as Devin had mentioned earlier too, something that a lot of us, especially men, and especially in Southeast Asian cultures, some cultures don't discuss this enough, and instead kind of just internalize it and not acknowledge that it exists. In the past, I think, and maybe even in the present too, saying that you're anxious or you're stressed, people would be worried that they're being dramatic. But it's not being dramatic. There are numbers that back up the concept of other people suffering from anxiety and stress. 1 in 5 people in the United States face some sort of mental health condition in any given year. And there have been a lot more statistics lately that have been released about how anxiety and depression are some of the most commonly reported conditions. This one was in college campuses. There was a New York Times article last year that talked about how anxiety is a much bigger issue than we think it is. And just this past week, the American Psychiatric Association has been doing yearly reviews of anxiety, and they found that anxiety levels in the United States have been increasing, particularly around paying bills. So they're financial stressors. And then just about 5 days ago, a study of folks in the UK showed that high job demands, low sense of control in jobs, and high job strain has been predictive of a future onset of common mental health conditions, basically depression and anxiety too. So this is something that a lot of us are facing too. And if we don't address these issues, it can lead to things like depression, a low mood, high stress hormones, cholesterol, epinephrine, which boosts your blood pressure in an unhealthy manner if it's too long term, poor coping skills, and burnout as well. So there are a lot of different flavors of stress, and there are a lot of symptoms that can manifest itself. But in general, I would say that stress, there are different flavors of stress. Sometimes stress can be harnessed for good, right? If you don't have some sort of deadline, or if you don't have some sort of motivating factor, it can be difficult to get things done, right? So there are 2 psychologists at Harvard that talked about performance and correlating it with levels of stress. And if you have too little amount of stress, then you tend to be more bored and you tend to be too calm. But if you have just the right amount of stress, or eustress, you can achieve optimal performance. You feel energized, you feel focused, work can feel effortless, or you might achieve that flow state. But if you have too much stress, then your performance can suffer. And this is something we call distress, where it can lead to things like burnout, fatigue, exhaustion, health issues too. And burnout, there are some components of burnout that can inform you of whether you may be at risk too. Exhaustion, cynicism, and feeling like nothing's really mattering, not feeling like your work doesn't matter. So exhaustion can include feelings of negativity. You can't concentrate. You're just kind of emotionally fatigued. In feeling incompetent, that especially occurs if you don't have enough resources, or if you don't have clear expectations, or you don't have good relationships with your coworkers or your family. And cynicism too, feeling detached, negative, feeling like it doesn't matter. So combinations of these can be a sign of burnout and stress. This especially happens if you happen to be a workaholic. So I remember going through college, that helped me plow through a lot of exams. But then that's to the point. Sometimes people get this to an unhealthy state where they're working excessively because things don't meet their standards. Things aren't perfect enough. There's also a different type of perfectionism where you just completely avoid doing work, and you end up procrastinating and avoiding touching that inbox because you know that you can't get through inbox 0. So it's very fascinating to learn about this perfectionism, and there are ways to address this as well. when we see folks in clinic, we try to come up with some sort of thought of as to what may be going on and what symptoms may be closely matching to a particular diagnosis. And that just helps us sort of find the best sort of ways to treat these conditions. Generalized anxiety is one of them. And generalized anxiety is when you feel like you're on edge almost most of the time. You feel maybe nervous or you can't control the worries. You may feel like it is difficult to concentrate, or you may be easily fatigued too. And that tends to happen with throughout the day. So that's sort of anxiety throughout the day. And then some folks have panic attacks where their anxiety spikes within just a few minutes. They feel like they're short of breath, their heart rate goes up, they're shaking, they're sweating. I've seen this in classmates and colleagues as well. And this can get to the point where you have maybe multiple panic attacks a day, and then you avoid things like driving because you don't know if you can drive in a car without getting a panic attack. Some people have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's when you're exposed to something that is life-threatening or very traumatic, and then afterwards how you react to that stress can determine whether you're able to function normally at work and at school and at home too. So I've seen folks with major trauma in their lives, but they're able to brush it off just fine. They don't think about it, they don't get nightmares. And then I see others who tell me that they face a major trauma. They get nightmares at night, or maybe daytime nightmares or flashbacks, and they don't realize they have PTSD. So this is something that I think is important to recognize in our peers and ourselves too, if this is something that we faced growing up. There's obsessive compulsive disorder, where obsessions, you can't get rid of thoughts. They just keep on coming up in your mind, and you know that they're not realistic, but you gotta figure out a way to get rid of them. And then there are compulsions where you're doing things over and over again, like washing your hands for a long period of time just to sort of feel better, or maybe you're checking locks for like an hour a day. Gets to the point where it interferes with your life too. So that's OCD. That's another type of anxiety. So there's also addiction too, where you take substances or alcohol, and they have all sorts of different drugs that can cause different reactions. Bottom line is that this is a brain disease, and this is where folks may have an addiction, and they may use it even though they know full well that it's harmful too. So this addiction, the good news is that there's ways to treat this, sort of this brain condition, but certainly recognizing it is an important first step. So you may have seen questionnaires online that talk about, might you have burnout, or might you have depression? And one of the questionnaires we have is the PHQ-9, Patient Health Questionnaire with 9 questions. But this one is particularly for depression, but there are all these issues that occur with the PHQ-9, and wouldn't you know it, we have a whole manual called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that tries to help us diagnose and recognize these symptoms. But realistically, what we try to do is look at the whole picture, someone's whole life. And a 2-inch book doesn't cover all of the possibilities sometimes. So this is what I like to call, what we call the 1,000 cuts. Sometimes people are wounded by 1,000 cuts. So you might need quite a few Band-Aids for those cuts. So recognizing those external drivers, all of these external things that can cause anxiety and stress is important. And so that way you can know what the problem is, and then you can hack it if you need to. So this is me in an outpatient clinic. I remember one of the folks that came to see me actually was very, very stressed out. Well, what kind of stress were they facing? They were actually, he was actually hearing voices that weren't really there, and it was because we had to ask, how long has this been going on? And he said, well, he hasn't been sleeping for a while. Sleep affects your daytime performance, your mood and your anxiety, and that also in turn affects your sleep. So we tried to address the sleep first, tried to address the hallucinations that they were having. Next time they came into clinic, they came to see me, and he said he's still having them. And I dived deeper. Why were they anxious? about why were they not be able to sleep. Actually, I gave the punchline already. And it would turn out they were very anxious. What were they anxious about? They were actually anxious about work. Turned out that they couldn't concentrate, they couldn't focus at work, they couldn't get the things done. They were about to be laid off or fired. And in talking with them further and digging deeper into these details, found out that for their whole life, he had been suffering through ADHD, actually, and not knowing the exact diagnosis and that it was treatable. So we treated the ADHD, and the next time they came to the clinic was the calmest I've ever seen him, and he was able to actually function quite well at work and be able to sleep at night too, just because we were able to dive deep into those details, keeping on asking, why is it this way? Why is it this way? And instead of just looking at the surface. So knowing all of these things is important, and we try to combine epidemiology, all these statistics, 1 in 5, that affects a lot of us in this room. That doesn't quite help. So we have to dive deeper into the details. What if it's a cultural issue? If you were Southeast Asian, for instance, could there be an issue such as coming from a family who immigrated from a war-torn country? Could that be a cultural issue? So we try to combine this into some sort of framework. So for instance, one particular framework is the biopsychosocial model, where we look at the biology, the psychology, and the social factors that make up someone, and inform them on how they behave. All factors such as where is their family from? Was there trauma in their family? And how do they react to adversity? Do they have enough resilience to carry them through the day? So we look at things like this through the lens of even, say, culture and religion too. Southeast Asians, for instance, have a lot of ingrained elements of religion into their culture, like Confucianism and Buddhism, that may prevent them from seeking help that they need. And I'm mentioning this because I've done work amongst multiple Southeast Asian cultures. Things like accepting suffering, too, can be a major issue, too, when you're trying to help somebody and they're not telling you exactly, or they're not filling the questionnaire out correct, to reflect their own internal reality. Things like so not just the internal pressures, but external pressures and society's expectations of them. So for instance, in Southeast Asian cultures, there's an enormous pressure to perform, to be perfect, to be that sort of whiz kid that's being talked about in popular press like Time magazine. And can you achieve success, or is there something that's preventing you from achieving that success? So recognizing is important, and there are all sorts of other things to recognize that even within subcultures too, you can't always assume that there's a blanket sort of stereotype. So for instance, among particular populations, some Southeast Asian cultures don't finish high school. There have been a large number of foreclosures during the Great Recession, long-term unemployment that can affect particular subgroups in the United States. Environmental factors can be an issue. If you've been exposed to a lot of trauma, violence, neglect, abuse, or poverty, can put you at higher risk. The things that happen or don't happen in childhood, the number of parents, the amount of time your parents were around, how much family were around, medical conditions too, and abuse too, or school issues, teacher issues, and bullies as well too, can also inform the way you react to adverse events too. Relationships, this can be a sensitive subject. Things like interpersonal violence and how unstable or stable a relationship is, and whether you're supported or unsupported through your preferences and your desire for a relationship can be a factor. And then finally, two other things, biology can be something that can be an issue. So medical conditions, the way your brain is set up, the way your brain is structured too, if there's any sort of trauma that had happened, physical trauma that happened to the brain, thyroid conditions, a lot of things can cause anxiety and stress. Even the medicines that we take can come with some with side effects as well. And how the amygdala too is structured. The amygdala is this emotional center of the brain of here that processes all these sensory inputs. And if it senses any sort of things that it perceives as a threat, it can cause all these things to happen in your body. An increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. You might be on edge a lot. You might freeze too, and you might not be thinking correctly. So just imagine if you had a lot of sort of stressful situations at work and you're constantly on edge, your amygdala would be on fire all the time too. So being able to handle this is important too, as well as the psychology and how you react and how you behave too. So for instance, there are some personality factors such as self-esteem, which we talked about earlier, things like how well you deal with stress, and if you are generally pessimistic too, that can affect the way that you behave too. So that's why I think that there isn't a magic bullet treatment, right? There are all these things that you can address, and knowing which knobs, which buttons to push, and which things to adjust can be helpful and important in your life if you're trying to sort of reduce your anxiety and reduce your stress. So the hacks, right? I think of this in terms of computer programming. When you're trying to program something or some sort of large structure, there's multiple ways of doing this. You might be doing this in an iterative fashion, right? Because you're continuously changing the code or continuously improving the product too. In programming, there's no one magic solution. If you go to Stack Overflow and you're trying to find the answers to your question, there are many different ways to hack that Python script, for instance. You have to research this, you have to implement, test it in your life too, and deploy. And if some of you are in sales or management more, it's sometimes difficult to understand, okay, how am I going to achieve that milestone or get that deliverable when there are all these other market conditions, new regulations in DC and around the world that can be changing the way you practice and develop your product. So there are 4 particular hacks that I'd like to go over. This is just a menu of different ways you can address some of those conditions earlier. And so you can cherry pick the ones that you think will work for you. Try one a week or try one every 2 weeks to see if it works. We're going to talk about hacking your mind, hacking your body, hacking your time, and hacking your social life. And of course, there's all these other ways you can hack the rest of your life, hacking your transportation or hacking your sleep too. But first, hacking your mind, how you think, how you feel, and how you act can be helpful when you're dealing with stress and anxiety. So I think I had alluded to this earlier too. Anxiety is something I definitely face myself. Feeling like, I got to do something and feeling a little nervous, right? And 20 years ago, again, being in front of a crowd and talking was quite nerve-wracking. So I did a series of experiments over the past, throughout my life, exposing myself to stress and exposing myself to little bits of stress initially and getting larger and larger each time. I remember teaching a Python help session. This was in Soda Hall, teaching with Aaron and some other folks from the Computer Science Undergraduate Association, and teaching a small group of undergraduates, teaching in Toastmasters. So while I was a software engineer, I joined other folks from the engineering teams to join Toastmasters, which is a group of peers who help each other out in terms of improving public speaking too. And then from there, I was able to handle sensitive conversations. So not just speaking in public, but speaking with sensitive people, speaking under sensitive conditions with families in the surgical ICU and then in the psychiatric intensive care unit, speaking in a business setting. So I think I told Gloria this, I specifically joined a business school because I wanted to learn how to speak in front of a professional crowd and learning how to handle and advocate for projects in front of a professional crowd. And then this went on to hackathons and learning how to pitch for instance, was very helpful. This was my exposure therapy. And other people do this too. If you have any particular fears, so fear of heights, fear of enclosed spaces, that's where exposure therapy can be very helpful. There's another type of therapy that's been very helpful, and that's where you kind of delete any sort of negative self-talk or delete any sort of negative behaviors. And there are particular ways to do this, and the most common form is through something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And CBT is basically where you take your thoughts, your cognitions, and your thoughts inform the way you feel, and how you feel informs the way you behave, or informs the issue. And so these sort of all affect each other. And how you change your behavior or how you change your thoughts can affect how you feel. So if we're trying to adjust the behavior, identifying the behavior, then decreasing the negative and increasing the positive aspects is something that you can coach yourself to do. So, for instance, if you feel bad or you feel angry or down because you're trying to find a job or trying to find a new project, you might be telling yourself, I'm never going to get the job, and you feel bad about it, then it may actually discourage you and you stop trying to apply for jobs. If you are, say, having a difficult time with a coworker during a sensitive meeting, and you might think, oh gosh, my colleague hates me, then you might feel angry about this. You might blame them, and you might end up giving them the cold shoulder. Or you might be in front of a large audience, and you might say, my talk at Google is going to fail, and you might feel scared, and then you might end up avoiding public speaking entirely. And so the key thing here is the avoidance. The avoidance and is something that you want to address. You want to change this behavior because a little bit of stress is a good thing. The stress isn't the issue, it's the behavior and how you react to it. Now there are some positive self-talk that you want to promote. So if you know, hey, I'm a pretty decent coder. I can hack this code. You might feel good about it. That might encourage you to do more check-ins or take on more projects. And so this is the kind of thing you want to promote too in your own loops, to use a Westworld reference. So there's another way to address this, with the thoughts too. You can change your thoughts instead of just the behavior, but thinking about the thoughts. Oftentimes, I just use that catastrophic example of, oh gosh, this talk at Google is going to fail massively, and people are going to point at me and laugh at me. And that's a catastrophe. That's the worst case scenario we can think of. So training yourself to think about other scenarios that could happen can be helpful. We use this in decision analysis in the business world. So thinking about the best case scenario. Well, the best case is getting to reach as many people as possible, helping them out, and everyone's anxiety and stress goes away. That'll be awesome, right? What is the most likely scenario? Well, maybe some place in between. So this sort of technique can be helpful in modulating your expectations and catastrophic thinking too. So you can try this yourself. There are a lot of books out there about cognitive behavioral therapy. There are also apps, audiobooks and guides, and if you do see a therapist, you can find one that specifically addresses cognitive behavioral therapy too. Being present in the moment can be also helpful too. So these are some worksheets you can get online too. Being present in the moment can be helpful because a lot of anxiety is just dwelling on the future, being worried about what the future holds, thinking about all the bad things that could happen. Eckhart Tolle wrote in The Power of Now that all of negativity can be caused by denial of the present. So not focusing on the present, but being worried about too much of the future and not enough of the present moment. So there are ways to introduce that presence in your life. For instance, mindfulness, meditation. You may have heard these terms talked about a lot. There are lots of different ways to go about it. Mindfulness is where you're aware of things outside your body. All of the external, your senses are alive. So for instance, you may be focused on the present moment of your environment, the sounds in the room, breathing too. Meditation is where you try to decrease the mental chatter, the monkey mind, they call it in Buddhism, and allowing the thoughts that pop up in your mind to flow by like clouds. And so this has been very prevalent, especially in entrepreneurs and CEOs who want to sort of achieve that focus. So this is one particular hack. Self-acceptance is something that's also important too. Living in the present moment requires that you accept the way you are at the moment and not be a doormat, not let other people walk over you. I myself had the shoulds in the past where I felt like I should be working on this website or I should be working on this research project. And I've been told by a few sources I should all over myself. Accepting your anxiety and stress too, and accepting that, hey, there's anxiety, what can you do about this? And not letting it define you can be helpful in your journey towards self-acceptance. And then gratitude, practicing gratitude can help you reframe negative thoughts and sort of that cycle of negativity and allow you to think about what's positive in your life. For instance, each day you could think about 3 things that you're grateful for, whether it's a coworker or whether it's one particular aspect of your work or even yourself too. Are there particular things that you're grateful for that you can appreciate? Storing it somewhere and reviewing it during stressful times can be very helpful too, so that when you're feeling down, then you can look back and see all the things that you're grateful for. And I've been able to use this in my own practice. And then finally, during stressful situations, there are techniques like the freeze frame technique, where if you're in the moment of acute anxiety or anger, you just be able to recognize that moment, try to step away from that moment, focus on breathing so that you can separate yourself from that stressful moment. You can think about a particular body part or the heart, and then trying to think of a positive feeling and then reflecting on whether you can change the scenario. Is there a better alternative towards thinking, and more constructive alternative towards thinking that way? So this is something that would require some practice, I think, but certainly this has been talked about in the business literature, the Harvard Business Review on stress. And final note, a lot of the techniques can be difficult to remember, I think. If you are, there's all these different techniques that are out there, all these different hacks. Sometimes apps can be helpful. This is something that we've been looking at the American Psychiatric Association. And definitely don't want to say I endorse any of them, but you can just try them out. These are low cost sort of ways to sort of achieve, implement these in your life too. And I think that what's exciting too is hacking your body can be helpful too. Your body and your mind are intertwined, and it's fascinating because I found that making sure that I treat myself well and practice self-care is important, and I actually gain clarity. And I got to say, even a year ago, I wasn't this way. I really wasn't this way. A year ago, I had a BMI or body mass index over 30, so I was considered medically obese. And it wasn't until I learned about all of these health issues in my family and then potential surgery coming up that I realized that I needed to act on this and sort of work on cutting down my obesity. So I looked at 2 things, diet and exercise, but how you do it, there's so many different hacks and ways to achieve that. And I think that the ones that seem to have helped the most is focusing on more of a Mediterranean diet. This particular one is where you're focusing on more whole grains, foods, plant-based foods, instead of the more Western diet, starches, fried foods, and sort of processed foods too. And in the scientific literature, we're seeing more that following these diets can be helpful in reducing your risk of depression and reducing your risk of feeling down. When we are looking at things like fiber too, having a high fiber content can decrease your odds of depression, and also helping out with your gut bacteria. And we're finding out more and more that the fiber in food and plants can help promote healthy colonies of bacteria to grow within your gastrointestinal tract too. fiber, and then also probiotics. A lot of folks are making a big deal out of this. I think that the studies aren't really, for anxiety and depression, are more in rat models and mouse models. But certainly there's a lot of claims out there right now that are saying that probiotics should be nicknamed as psychobiotics because they do change the way we think. We already know that they can lower fasting glucose and decrease blood pressure. And again, in mouse models, it does reduce anxiety and depression-related behaviors. So it's spawning a whole new area of research about the gut and the brain, and seeing how what we eat and how we treat our gut can affect the way our brain functions through metabolites, through neurotransmitters like serotonin, through bacterial molecules. So it's very interesting. This particular physician in Columbia University has been talking about nutritional psychiatry, nutritional mental health, and how it can affect your mood. And so he's been discussing the scientific literature behind eating right and having a better mood. Exercise. This is me futilely trying to use the elliptical. And there are different ways to hack exercise. I've tried to do this by commuting by bicycle, for instance, both in Southern California, believe it or not, and Northern California. And finally, I found that group exercise really helps me because I feel like my mirror neurons, which are this concept where you're sort of able to mimic other people and sort of feel what other people are feeling, are most active because I feel like exercising when other people around me are exercising too. So I've been fortunate enough to use apps with Google Fit on tracking my calories and tracking the nutrients, and I've been able to see results, and I've lost 30 pounds, which is awesome over this past half year. I've noticed that there are rewards. I've had to buy new clothes. My energy's higher. I see results, but I also have not just the rewards, but also the fear of, say, the upcoming surgery and societal expectations as well, too. So could you use that to harness yourself and motivate yourself to do more productive behaviors? Yes, it's kind of a negative thought, but it's been helpful for me, too. So hacking your body, hacking your mind. How about hacking your time? Time is something that's really precious to us. And it's interesting to see a lot of business articles about this. But one of the most salient quotes, I think, is from this speaker who also spoke at Talks by Google, Ramit Sethi, who's a New York Times bestselling author. He says that, show me a man's calendar and spending, and I'll show you what he prioritizes. So show me your time, show me how you spend your money, and then it kind of shows you where your priorities lie. So just imagine if you took your calendar and plotted out every single hour of your day and ranking, was this productive, and does it make me feel good? Do I feel like I have a lot of energy or value from this hour that I spent too? And I remember doing this even with my old devices. Shows you how old I am. I use this on the Palm OS. I've been thinking about this for over a decade. This is the Tapwave PDA, and even I tried the Moleskine notebooks and printing calendars out too. People have all sorts of different ways of how they track their time. But I think that the most fundamental thing that, the calendars change. I think you've deployed Google Tasks, a new version of Google Tasks, a week or two ago, which is exciting. But every year, every 2 years, I'm finding myself using different tools. But the bottom line is being able to take all the worries and all the anxiety out of your head using an external brain and allowing that external brain to deal with the worries is important. And I think no one talks about this better than David Allen, who talks about the art of stress-free productivity. And he actually has an algorithm in his book, and you can find this algorithm online too, about how you can get tasks, get the worries out of your head, email, etc., and how to sort of do it, delegate it, or defer it, as he says, as the actions, and placing them into lists, calendars, and folders. Being able to worry about it, letting something else worry about it, and putting your anxiety somewhere else can be very, very helpful. And then also focusing on your locus of control can be helpful and not on things outside your control. So people have talked about things like the information diet and blocking off things that they can't control, social media, news sources, and instead checking them maybe even once a day or even once a week too, to minimize that stressor too. Saying no to FOMO can be really difficult, especially here in San Francisco. I think there's so many different activities that happen every day, and FOMO, if you don't know, it's the fear of missing out, and being able to recognize the fear of missing out, identifying if the FOMO applies to social media or conference events. If you're at a conference, I think some of you have had that where there are 7 concurrent tracks going on, and you gotta choose 2, or you don't know where to turn to. That can lead to a lot of FOMO too. So being able to recognize that FOMO, setting limits and setting boundaries too can be helpful. So you tell yourself, I will dedicate 3 hours to 8 hours of just conference time, and then I deserve to have a 2-hour break, or I deserve to have drinks with friends later on too. So thinking about those options and seeing what's most appealing to you and being content with it can be helpful too. Especially in the work environment, especially in the home environment, blocking off time for productive time to productively play is important, so that you can sort of let your mind wander, get those aha moments when you're in the shower, or if you're on nature hikes too. Sleep, blocking off enough time for sleep can be helpful too. There's a whole art to hacking sleep that I talk about with the patients I treat, and trying to help them with their sleeping. And then pets too. This particular dog has helped my family as well with our anxieties and stress levels. And then finally, too, looking at how you structure your time blocks too can be helpful. There's the Pomodoro method. This is something similar to the Pomodoro method, where you do a lot of hard work and activity, and then you take a break deliberately for, say, 10 minutes. You just kind of check out, relax, surrender control, let your mind wander, and then dive back in when you need to. So some people use 10 minutes, some people use a whole night for sleep or showering. That's one particular technique, and there's a similar technique that I've used called the Pomodoro technique that helped me sustain focus with a timer. Hacking your social life is also one of the final hacks that I'll talk about. How you can choose your tribe can be very important too. The thing I try to remind myself is, now in our professional circles and our personal circles, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? You basically adopt the decision-making habits of the people you hang out with. You attain their knowledge. We talk about strong ties and weak ties in networks, in social networks. And so these are the strong ties, and who you choose can be helpful to your life too. So you want to choose positive people who are givers and who are not takers. There's a fascinating book by Adam Grant, Give and Take, that talks about how he's found people who are generous and how they're able to focus on the greater good and how they're able to benefit people in their network, instead of people who just take things for themselves and sort of use other people and walk over them like doormats. And so being a giver can be helpful in setting the tone for the rest of your colleagues and your friends, but you also want to avoid burnout or bending over backwards too much and letting other people use you too. Celebrating wins is important too. And I think that this is something I don't see too much, not used as much in the medical world because we're so busy. But I've noticed that even during stressful times, leaders will reward people even with a simple thank you too. Thank you, I'm grateful to you for your work. Can really lift people's spirits, and it's very, very inexpensive. Showing gratitude to yourself too, celebrating who you are and your strengths can help change the way you view yourself if you have self-esteem issues, and then trying to decrease destructive criticism and destructive negative self-talk. this has been helpful to me because in my line of work, we make new best friends every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, there's a different project or there's a different hospital or a different clinic that we go to. Think of them just like Pokemon, right? Pokemon is where folks are able to collect and categorize and find out strengths, people's strength, their own Pokemon strengths. So too, you want to do this with anyone you meet, any friends, family, and I've been able to adopt this system in my contacts list, tagging folks by location, how I met them, because one of the biggest anxieties I have is when I meet someone again for the second time or the third time, I completely forget. How did I meet them? What do they like? I forget their names too. So using these techniques can be helpful, and there are whole books that have been written, such as this one, Never Eat Alone, by Keith Ferrazzi, that talks about these sort of hacks. So lots of different hacks we've talked about. I want to leave you with one final thought, is that if there are so many different hacks out there, it is a lot of fun, actually, to sort of figure out how you can boost yourself, how you can make yourself feel better, less anxious, less stressed. And I'm glad to see that the mainstream media and mainstream blogs are talking about these topics. BuzzFeed, for instance, has talked about mental health issues. Business coaches, this is one of my mentors and colleagues, Preston Nee, who's talked about not just East and West Asian American professionals, but now he's looking at personality and how it informs communication with difficult people and narcissists too. And professionals in my sphere of work, physicians, which includes psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and marriage and family therapists, all are trained to listen in a non-judgmental way and be able to offer guidance to help you navigate through rough waters. And there's medicines too. If things get really severe, you can do the 1-2 punch. I tell the folks I help out. There's talk therapy and there's medicine therapy. There are pros and cons to each one, and they all act in different lengths of time too. And so we're here to help you navigate those waters. And then there are lots of different groups out there, advocacy groups. NAMI, for instance, is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. But I wanted to highlight the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, ADAA. They've got some really cool charts on how you can figure out what kind of therapy is best and what kind of therapy you might like. And they talk about things like FOMO and ADA and also ADHD, I believe, too. And then if you're interested in technology, we're here at Google. There are a lot of technology events that are around mental health. And so if you wanted to hack with us, you can join us at the American Psychiatric Association. The American Telemedicine Association has their own group. And then the hackathon that we had met at Gloria, Hack Mental Health, they have an upcoming hackathon in early June, too. And it's very easy to join, too. So we've talked about how you can cover the signs and symptoms and recognize them, and how you can hack different aspects of your life for your own mental well-being, and how you can power up. But I just wanted to underscore how important it is for us to normalize this and talk about the subject. So if you're able to talk about this, swap techniques, share techniques, and how we can improve our own lives and the lives of people around us, that will be an amazing outcome, I think, for this. So I'm happy to send a summary and some bonus material. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. This was very informative. I learned a lot, and I'm going to be watching it again. Do we have any live questions?
Hi. I know that you talked about exposure therapy, where you talked about kind of exposing people to your triggers over time gradually, and then CBT, where you can delete or remove those triggers from your life. How do you balance, or where do you draw the line between like what to kind of keep exposing yourself to and like what to remove?
Sure. I actually would say that CBT isn't exactly removing, but sort of reframing the way you react to it. So it's not entirely like you notice that the stressor is still there. Your coworker and colleague still exists. We can't delete our colleagues, and then also we can't. We might not be able to delete the actual issue, but how we react to it is the core change we're trying to make with CBT and exposure therapy. In exposure therapy, we're changing how we react to a stressor, but we're not changing the stressor itself. In CBT, there's something that's also stressful, either the thought or the behavior, and we just basically try to change those or modulate them. So I think that's how I would frame that.
Can you speak about how you anticipate technology will support mental health management over the next 10 years and how you think Google can help?
Sure. You already have had a phenomenal speaker. I think Dr. Daniel Schlosser spoke at an earlier meeting too on this subject too. I think that there are many different ways, but I got to say technology is 20% of the answer. The rest of it is going to be politics and policies, things like reimbursement, how you can train the mental health leaders to be able to spread these technologies. That's going to be an important aspect too. So a lot of the technologies are already there. We already have video conferencing. You already have apps. You already have sort of activity trackers and smartwatches. But how are we going to use that is going to be the next frontier. And so we're seeing a lot of activity in terms of research and dissemination. So so partnering with folks like the UCSF Psychiatry Digital Health Core, for instance, they are trying to work with researchers on getting digital health and digital technologies implemented. So I'd encourage you to look at the UCSF Psychiatry Digital Health Core.
Thank you.
Thank you.